What up? What up? It's your man Sean P coming in live. This is Sean P Experience on YouTube, man. I love having return guests. One of my private things is having somebody come back to the show more than one time. I had my brother on the Instagram show a few years ago whenever the book, The American Family, first released. And now I got him coming back on the show for a very important, special, vital topic, man. How you doing today, my brother?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back. I'm just happy to be chatting with you again about this, important time, important subject. So yeah, man, thanks for having me back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Do a proper introduction, man. Today I'm sitting with a man who digs for truth in the bones of black memory. Santi Holley, author of An American Family. We're talking about Assata Shakur tonight. Not the mugshot, but the mind. Not the myth, but the woman who terrified an entire nation with nothing but her idea. Here we go, man. Let's get into it, man.
Let's do it.
Yes. So this show is called Sitting with the Griots podcast, where we're honoring storytellers just like we did in the ancient time. How do you feel about being called a modern day griot? When you think about that name and the work that you're doing, do you feel any pressure carrying the weight of that legacy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Every time I write something new, every time I sit down and write something, every time I share these stories, I feel like the weight of thousands and thousands of years of folks who have come before me. When I was working on American Family and people were sharing those stories with me, I just felt like, this is so heavy. But at the same time, what I'm saying? Like, this is how history is made. This is how stories are continued uh, by sitting down with folks, by sitting down with you, by sitting down with another person and just telling these stories and making sure they don't fade away into history, because, especially, to get into it, I'm saying, like, especially these days, people want to erase these stories. They're doing everything they can to erase these stories. So we got to do everything we can to keep these stories alive. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm trying to do. There's only so much one person can do as far as carrying that weight, carrying that burden, not a burden, a responsibility, um, and then sharing it with others. So that's what I'm trying to do. But it doesn't come easy. Every time I sit down and try to write something new and I try to get these words out and try to tell the story as honestly and truthfully as I can, I feel like people looking at me. People are like, all right, don't you mess up now, boy.
And let's pick it back off of that a little bit. When it comes to you mentioned the oral tradition, oral storytelling, and some people don't value the oral story as much as things in black and white and things of that nature. Talk about the importance of the oral tradition that we've always had in our culture, the importance of that and how it's still relevant, just as anything written, the oral storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, oral tradition, oral history, oral storytelling, that's longer than the written, the written practice. Written storytelling only goes back so far. We don't even know way before then there was oral storytelling. And even though today we have the written word, we have the internet, we have social media, we have videos, we have podcasts, we have everything, all these different ways to tell stories. All comes down to the oral tradition, because nothing means nothing if we're not telling these stories. We don't have anything to write down or to post or publish if we don't have that oral tradition behind us. Making sure that we can tell a good story, making sure that we're listening to the elders and all that. So all this goes back to just the beginning of just storytelling as a way to not just tell stories and not just to share experiences, but really to honor folks who came before us, honor our ancestors, honor our elders. Any way we can do that, written word, posts, but really like the oral tradition is with us, has been with us for many thousands of years, and it will stay with us even after we can't write no more, even if we don't have internet no more. We still have our mouths, we still can talk, we still can share stories with each other. So I think the oral tradition isn't just history; it's the present, and it'll be the future too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we're here to celebrate the life and legacy of Asada Shakur. Now, whenever you got word of her transitioning, like give us an idea of some of the first things that came in your mind. If you remember, like what were you doing? Where were you? You got that phone call or the phone? How was that?
Yeah, actually, I got word the night of Sister Tandi Chimarenga, writer and author, radio host. She let me know, you know, send a text message, and I was just like, I couldn't believe it. It's one of those things that you don't really even think about happening because it seems like Assata's always been with us. You know what I'm saying? It seems like she's always in some way just been with us. So, my first reaction was like, well, how do we know that? I mean, how do we, has anybody said anything? Has it been an official statement? Um, but then the next day, there was an official statement. And so I thought, you know what I thought? I mean, I wasn't mournful. I wasn't grieving. I said, I was celebratory. I said, she won. You know, they never got her. They never got her. She won. I said, all right, there you go. So that's the way I've been feeling. So I've been, thinking about just what she represented, to so many folks across the world. Um, and man, it's because she means so much because she was, like I say in the book, like I've said before, I think I said, last time we talked, that Assata she was an enigma. She was a person who a lot of folks really saw themselves in, but also didn't really know her as a person. They knew her writing, they knew her words, but none of us really, none of us, most of us didn't really know her as a person. She'd been living in Cuban exile since, 1980. We never got to go see her talk, see her give a book tour, none of that stuff. So, but all we know of her is her words that she gave us, which was more than enough. But right now it's like, all right, well then that's it then. No more words, no more communication. So we have what we had. And that's more than enough.
So let me ask you this question as a writer. So your book came out like 2 or 3 years ago, give or take. And when a moment like this happens, and maybe people that weren't aware of Assata Shakur before, now they're getting their curiosity, and now they say, you know what? I'm gonna go get that American Family book. I'm gonna go and pick that up. I'm gonna check it out now. How do you feel as a writer? Like you did this work recently, and now people are probably going to pick it up. They're probably going to see what's up with it. They're going to
Yeah.
see what it is.
Yeah. I mean, my book and the way I've always thought about it, my book is just one of many contributions to this history. So if someone wants to pick up my book, and they're going to learn this history, they're going to learn a part of this history, but not all of the history. You got to read Assata's book. You got to read all this different history. History of the Black Panther Party, Mumia Abu Jamal. You got to read his book. You got to read all these different works just to kind of get an idea. If you weren't there, like I wasn't there, I wasn't part of the movement. So the way I learned the story was by reading books, by talking to people, doing research, doing interviews, anything I could do to try to tell, this story. But it's just one contribution to the story. It's bigger, it's ongoing, like the story's not over, it's still happening. So when people pick up my book and they're like, oh, I didn't know about Matulu Shakur, I didn't know about Lumumba Shakur, I didn't know about, all these folks. I'm like, that's great, but that's just a start. I mean, the way I saw American Family was, maybe an introduction to folks who don't really know the Black Liberation Movement, this history. They're going to see a lot of people. They're going to read a lot of names. They're going to get a little background on what these folks were about, where they came from, how they, what they survived. But that story, but there's still more stories out there that I have no right to tell. But I wanted to at least, get that conversation going, give a sort of introduction to this history, and then let folks sort of take it over from there.
Let me ask you this question as a writer once again. Now that she has transitioned, and a lot of people around the globe are pouring their flowers and saying her impact, what it meant, all the other kind of things are coming out after her passing. Are you going to do like a second edition of the add on, an extended, new edition of it? Or are you going to pretty much leave it where it is, let it stand where it stands?
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I don't know how much more I could say or contribute to that I haven't already, done with the book. I don't know. I mean, I would love to, do some more talks like this and actually talk about Assata's legacy, about who she was, things that maybe folks don't really know about her. But I don't want to get in the way, really, of other folks who have other things to say. And right now, it's like okay. Also, right now, you and I, we're two men sitting here talking about the strong Black woman who, is such an inspiration to other Black women. And at times, I have to feel like, all right, I don't want to. I don't want my voice to be like, I'm an authority on, you got to listen to me, what I have to say. I want just to like step back and be like, all right, so I'll take it over. Like I said my piece, I said my bit. And so, yeah, I don't know if it'd be like an appendix or a second edition where I add any new information. I mean, really, what I have to say about Assata is, they never got her. She won, she died as free as she lived, and that's my piece.
Yes, sir. Yes. So let me ask you about the beginning, right? You're doing the American Family book. You're doing your research and your writing. When you came time to approach the Assata Shakur subject matter, she is this person like larger than life, kind of like Malcolm X for a lot of people. Like her
Right,
biography is like the autobiography of Malcolm X for a lot of people. So
right.
how did you get the confidence? Like, you know what? I'm gonna say something that wasn't said already.
Mm.
I'm gonna reveal or find something they don't know about. How did you get that kind of confidence in yourself to do it?
Yeah, that's a good question because uh, I struggled a little bit when I was learning things about her, things that she was accused of. That we don't really talk about, and she doesn't really talk about in her book the things that she was actually accused of. We know that we know the facts as they are, have presented in her book. When I learned that there were some things that you know uh, were just not as widely disseminated, not as widely shared. I had this moment of like, what right do I have to say this thing? Talking about her, how she escaped from prison, talking about the people who helped her escape from prison, the people who helped her get to Cuba. Some of them folks are still alive. Some of them folks have just recently passed. Uh, but I was, my thing was just like, you know what? This isn't. I'm not doing my job as a storyteller, as an author, if I'm not sharing folks like how actually inspirational this was. And like the story behind her escape from prison, that's a crazy story, but it goes to show that it can be done. Like it can be done when folks are united and come together. And when I talked to some folks who were directly involved with Assata escaping from prison, and they told me, just straight out how it went down. And I'm like, if you're telling me, you know, I feel like other folks are going to want to know too, because it's been this mystery of like, how did she actually escape from prison? 1979. And when I learned, from the folks themselves, I was just like, man, y'all did this. Like, you did that, and it was such a well organized thing that they did that I was like, I gotta include this. Like, if I keep this to myself, I'm not doing my job. So yeah, but I did have that moment of like, do I have the right to tell these stories? I'm like, well, I'm a storyteller, I'm a writer. This history is too important just to die out with folks. Because I'm talking about, I mean, some folks who have recently passed since my book came out, since Amerikan Family was published. We lost Dr. Mutulu Shakur, we lost Baba Sekou Odinga. These are two folks who were directly involved with Assata, with her liberation. But they were still alive when the book was published. And I was like, well, you are still alive, but the world needs to know that you are the people who were behind this. I mean, them and some other folks who are still alive. we're involved in this very important thing that we are still benefiting from, right? We're still benefiting from Assata's liberation because she was able to go on and publish her autobiography and be this person that she really wasn't at the time. You know, before she went into prison, she wasn't really known as Assata Shakur worldwide, all over. Not until later, not until her liberation, not until she really just succeeded and won and gained her freedom and started writing and publishing and really just defeated, the U.S. imperialist machine. What did she actually become Assata Shakur? But there were a lot of people behind her. You know what I'm saying? Like there were a lot of folks who were right behind her, lifting her up, helping her, guiding her, and giving her freedom. So I really wanted to definitely just like lift those folks up and, while they, and try to get them their flowers while they're still alive. But, I feel like that's just, there's so many folks who are still alive who want to make sure, it's up to them. Really. I'm not going to, like call any names right here, but there's a lot of folks who were important to Assata's life and her liberation and her thinking, her education. And, these folks, I do write about in the book, but, they definitely deserve to be known and celebrated for what they did.
Yeah, that's very important what you just said, man, because I've been blessed to interview a lot of biographers on this show. And there's always this tricky thing about, I know all these things in my research, like what do I say in the book that might, if they
Right.
damage somebody's legacy or it might hurt some other people just for the sake of a book? Like, is it worth it? Like, is this thing you got to weigh? And how you make those choices,
Yeah, I mean, but it's, it's not nothing to be taken lightly. This thing that we do, storytelling, writing, publishing books, and there's real consequences, good and bad. You can inspire somebody and you can also, call somebody out that didn't want to be called out. But that's just part of, that's what we do, is we just try to tell a story as factually, as accurately as possible, because we're sharing history. We're sharing history, and we're sharing history for the benefit of us here today, right? So that's why we're doing it. That's why any of us should be doing it. Is how are we going to affect us in our community and our folks, here and now? Because history is just history if we don't actually learn from it and actually, apply it to our lives and make it the present. Then it's just history. It doesn't really do nothing for us. So, but that's the job that we have. It's an important job.
Yes, sir. So I want to go back. I want to go back to earlier, before she's Assata Shakur, before that, and she's still Joanne, right? And she's attending this community college, 1960s, this climate. A lot of people are getting radicalized, and she's hearing all these different kinds of Black movements and Black thought. And she's first starting to get that light bulb turned on. Take us back to that time and educate us on how she started to turn that corner.
Mm. Yeah, she was. Yeah. Before she was Assata, as you said, she was Joanne Tresemar, born Joanne Byron. Tresemar was her husband's name that she kept. But yeah, and that's how she was known to most of the folks in the Black Panther Party, Joanne. And she was questing for knowledge. She wanted to be out there. She wanted to be, taking action and things. She was hungry for just to be involved. She just wanted to be involved. Joined the Panthers in 79. 69, excuse me. And then became disillusioned by 1970 because at that point, by 1970, the Panthers were fractionalized. They were there's a lot of infighting. COINTELPRO was, doing what they do to them by just fomenting distrust. So when Assata, when Joanne joins the party in 1969, 1 year later, she's already like, this isn't for me. This ain't for me. Like these folks are, she wanted, and also there's a lot of misogynism within the party, which she talks about in her book with the leaders. And so her good friend Zaid, who was Zaid Malik Shakur, who was the deputy minister of information in New York, was Assata's good friend, took her in, and they formed a kinship, and she took the name because the Shakur family had such respect back then, you know, in New York and the Panthers and everything. The Shakur name carried a lot of weight. So she said, I want to stay involved, but the Black Liberation Army, they're starting to separate from the Black Panther Party, go underground, covert actions, not be so much underground or above ground, which is the Black Panther Party was above ground. You know, they had offices, they had the newspaper, they took donations. Black Liberation Army, everything was underground. They didn't publish no papers. They didn't have no offices. They were on the run. They stayed on the run. They stayed moving. So, you know, Assata said, all right, I'm about that. And, you know, rolled with them. And Zaid was a part of that too. You know, everybody, a lot of folks were getting disillusioned with the Black Panther Party. And so the BLA, you know, they started doing stuff, you know, things that they were accused of were, you know, bank robbery, police ambushes, this and that. That's what, you know, that's part of what she was accused of, taking part of. That's what she, you know, the cops, the NYPD, the press, everybody was saying, oh, she is like the mother hen, you know, that's what they called her, the mother hen, you know, the high priestess of the BLA, all these terms for her when she was just, you know, there was no hierarchy, there was no leaders, you know what I'm saying? There was no like, you are this and you are that, you're the deputy, whatever. BLA was all just everybody together. And that's, you know, that's really when she got caught up, is when she started running around with them, you know, and like up until the turnpike. So, but yeah, I mean, Assata as a young woman was just hungry for action. You know, she was intelligent, you know, college educated, smart, just hungry for life, and really wanted to be, I guess, of service. She wanted to know where she could do the most, you know, with what she could do. You know, she trained to be a nurse. And so all this stuff is sort of like pointing her to like try to figure out how she could be of most service. And then people looked at that. The authorities looked at that. They said, "Oh no, we got somebody who's, you know, who's charismatic, you know, who's on the run, who, you know, doesn't want to be part of, you know, this system." And they didn't know who she was either. They couldn't, you know, figure out who she was or why she was a part of this, why some, you know, young woman from a pretty good family, you know, would suddenly run around with the BLA. But, you know, that was her business. She just wanted to be of service to the people. And this is how she felt like she could be of most service to the people.
So let's separate some fact from the fiction right there off the top about her Black Panther Party involvement. So many people, when they say Black Panther Party, then their mind going to Sada Shakur. That's automatic, like a relation. But she had a very, very short stint with the Panther Party. Whenever she was even there, like you were saying, like she wasn't like some hierarchy like
Right.
person in there. So like, why do you think that correlation happens between people when they think about Black Panther Party in the South?
I think I don't know. I wonder if people really associate her with the Black Panther Party and not the BLA, because, I mean, I think in some part, more folks know about the Black Panther Party. Almost everybody knows about the Black Panther Party. At least has heard of it. At least has like you know, they've heard the term. They might know Huey Newton. They might know Bobby Seale. Not a lot of folks know about the BLA, the Black Liberation Army, you know, and what they did and what they were about and what their mission was and what their philosophies were. You're like, so it's harder to say, you know, because we don't have, you know, movies made about the BLA. We don't have, you know, a bunch of books being published about the BLA. We don't, you know, BLA isn't taught in most schools or colleges, you know. So I think the Black Panther Party is an easier place, and that's where she, you know, that was where she kind of started, even though she was only there for about a year. That was sort of her introduction. I mean, she was enthusiastic about the Black Panther Party when she first joined. She wanted to be a nurse. You know, she was volunteering up in New York. But yeah, it wasn't that long before she realized the party wasn't giving her what she needed, or it really wasn't, you know, doing what it was doing so well, which is what she wanted to do, like the breakfast for school children, about the sickle cell anemia testing, all this stuff the party was celebrated for, like their best sort of community work. At this time in 1970, it was harder and harder for them to do that work with government repression. I mean, the government was murdering the Black Panthers. So at that point, they were just like, what do we do? We can't do our work if we're going to be infiltrated, by federal agents. So that's where the BLA kind of was born. So I don't know. I think folks, when they think about Assata and sort of what movement she was a part of, even the BLA, that was only a couple of years before but that's, something that really could not have survived. The Black Liberation Army could not have survived doing what they were doing all that long. I mean, there was different, former members of the BLA went on to do other work and other sort of revolutionary parties and different factions and formed different cadres. But the BLA was just, I mean, they were just wild. They're out there just, being wild. And that caught up with them because there wasn't so much of a message to like liberal, supportive, white Americans. They were not concerned like some other folks were, some other parties were, about soliciting donations. They had to make money their own way, which usually involved robbing banks, robbing armored cars. So everything they did was just like fast, quick, and sometimes violent, in the name of liberation. And I think a lot of folks, like you mentioned, like the myth versus the reality. I think, we don't really want to explore, or maybe we just don't know how to explore all the time, the things that Assata was accused of doing. Not to say that she was doing, but the things that she actually was accused of doing in the early 70s, which is why she was, imprisoned in the first place. I think it's important to talk about those things that the BLA was doing, because that's a part of the Black Liberation Movement is the Black Panther Party. I mean, they don't make for like an easy story to talk about in school. There's not going to be any like commemorative stamps or T-shirts, on the BLA, but we got to talk about what they did, because what they did was, see that the government was crushing the Black Panthers, and they decided, okay, if we're trying to do all these things above ground, feed school children, provide free healthcare for folks, and we're going to get murdered by our own government, well then, we're going to do something else. We're going to do something different. And I think it's important to know that history and know that, that's what Assata was a part of.
And I want to always educate people watching my show. Is very educational podcast. So let's break it down. The Black Liberation Army. Explain to us if you can, like what that is, what it represented, where it came from. A little snapshot of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Black Liberation Army was a clandestine group, loosely organized group. A lot of them came out of New York City, but there was different cells and different folks who were, part of the BLA all over the country. And basically it was about, waging armed guerrilla warfare against the US. It's about, ultimately there was some desire, expectation, or hope for independent land, independent Republic of Black Africa, New Africa in the South, like an independent land for Black folks to have self-determination. But until that point, that was the dream, that was the ideal, to have independent land. Until then, the BLA was accused of, like I said, committing armed robbery of banks, of armored trucks, using the money to buy, safe houses, rental cars, getaway cars, and then put some money away for some land in the South. A lot of things they did, I would say, maybe you would say, a lot of folks would say, we wouldn't be able to do ourselves. A lot of things like that, the BLA was doing, I wouldn't be able to do. But they decided that they realized, they came to the conclusion, the folks in the BLA, that this is the only way, to bring about liberation, because they'd seen the civil rights movement And they'd seen, even after that, they'd seen what they did to Malcolm X. They'd seen what they did to Martin Luther King. They'd seen what they did to the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton. And they decided at this point, this was in like 1970 to like 1977, maybe a little earlier, but like really started to like be kind of done right around 77. But they just said, all right, we're taking the struggle, we're taking the armed struggle for liberation out to the streets, and no more like, no more fundraising, no more newspaper, this is war. They said this is warfare, this is guerrilla warfare, and they are the soldiers in the guerrilla warfare. So, there's no real clear, definite number, like membership number, because there was no membership rolls that they filled out. But, there was enough that they gave the U.S. government, the federal, the feds, local police agencies were terrified. They were saying, like, we don't know what we're dealing with, which is, a good strategy, honestly, to when they say you don't want to let your enemy know how many members you have. They didn't say how many members they had. They didn't identify themselves, but they did organize with the same mission. The same mission, and mission was liberation of Black folks, independent land, self-determination, end to police violence, end to police harassment, and they did that by going underground. And they had a whole network of safe houses, of getaway cars, of supporters who So yeah, the BLA was no joke. The BLA was no joke.
Let's talk about the power of media at this point, right? Because yes, they were doing certain activities and things. That's true. But like the way the media and the government like just blew it up, fabricated it to where you had all these false Assata sightings, and
Right.
people are claiming certain other things they probably not having no part of, but they're attaching these crimes to them and what they were doing. So speak about the power of how media it can really, really just blow something out of proportion, man.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up, because it's something that I talk about in the book, which is how Assata in particular, early on, kind of was, the media, especially the New York media, was responsible largely for getting her name out there. A lot of folks didn't know who she was, but when the police or the NYPD reported to the media, the press, ran with whatever the NYPD said, talking about how she's the leader, she's this and she's that, and the press ran with it. That sort of like helps her notoriety in a way, where folks probably wouldn't have heard about her. She wasn't out there giving interviews, obviously. So the media really kind of introduced her name back, with Joe Manchestermar, into the minds of folks. Not until, she was arrested and convicted in 1977, and then started to sort of do her own narrative. She wanted to shape her own narrative, right? Because the press was saying all kinds of things about her, like, just all kinds of wild things. The press could just say whatever they wanted to say about Assata. So she took it into her own hands. She said, okay, well, now I got to speak for myself. And that's really where Assata becomes the Assata Shakur that we know, was when she started to say, okay, hold up, I got some things to say. She had been in jail for like 4 or 5 years, just trial after trial. I mean, she was on trial for 5 or 6 different things, from robbery, from police shooting, until she was finally convicted. She was acquitted or found not guilty of every case that was thrown at her for like 4 or 5 years, until the end, when she was convicted guilty of first-degree murder of the New Jersey state trooper. But folks didn't really know who she was or what she was about. They just knew, oh, she's a cop killer, she's a bank robber, whatever. That's all they saw in the media. So finally, she just said, okay, look, I gotta let folks know who I am and what I'm doing here. And started writing letters, starting smuggling out tapes, with her voice, and really sort of like created her own narrative. Well, not just created her own narrative, but really became this, the speaker, this writer, this thinker, and sort of letting the folks know what the BLA was, what the Black Liberation Army was doing, what she was doing, what her comrades were doing. It really became like, when she was locked up, then she was like, okay, now I'm already behind the wall. I'm going to let the folks know why I'm here and what I was trying to do, which she couldn't do, obviously, while she was, living underground. But this was her opportunity now to finally actually like let her voice out there and sort of talk to the folks directly. And she continued to. She continued to for years. It wasn't like she was like, I got one thing to say and I'm out. After, especially after she, made it to Cuba, she continued to write, publishing autobiography, giving speech, not speeches, but like giving interviews as long as she could until it became, I'm jumping ahead here, but until it became unsafe for her to even be in public in Cuba. She was a presence and she was active.
So during her time in, being imprisoned, she becomes pregnant, right? And they'll wonder, like, how in the world is this possible? How could this be? How could she be pregnant? Tell us about that whole situation with her and her baby.
Well, yeah, I don't. Her child is, a grown woman now, and she's going through. I can't imagine what she's, experiencing right now and going through, and just, she's mourning.
True.
But also, so I don't want to talk too much about like what the circumstances surrounding. I do a little bit in the book, mostly just because, she does also. She talks about like everyone was just like, how could you get pregnant? And it's one of those things where you got to think, well, was that? It seemed so impossible until you figure out what had happened back then, and then you're like, well, was that a conscious decision? Did she say, I'm going to get pregnant because I want to leave behind, thinking like, well, I might get convicted, spend the rest of my life behind bars, so I want to leave behind something of myself, or is there something more calculating about that? Like, well, that's going to affect my sentencing, or how people are going to see me, or how people are going to view me. And now that I'm a mother, in a way, it's like it reflects Afeni Shakur, which is Tupac's mom. Afeni Shakur got pregnant when she was out on bail, so she wasn't still in jail, but she was facing life in prison. And she got pregnant while she was out on bail. This was just 69, 70. And she decided to keep the baby. And she was, her reasoning, Afeni, was that, well, this is, this baby's going to go on to continue the battle, right? That's what she'd always say is, this baby's going to be the Black Prince of the Revolution. So she wanted to not leave behind, but she wanted to give something to the world that she wasn't going to be able to do another time. If she, she's Afeni and Assata both, I'm sure, believed, or at least had a, pretty good like guess that they were probably going to, be convicted, spend the rest of their lives in jail. So to have a baby, you could see it as this is the ultimate last defiant act. These folks don't want me to have a baby, have a family. I'm going to do it, and this baby's going to carry on my work. That's the way that it was justified. And I'm going to take them. I'll say that like it's a beautiful and also revolutionary statement, and act of its own. But I don't want to speak for Afeni or Assata and be like, this was the reason why they did this, because that's, but that's how it plays out, is like with Afeni having young Tupac, and even after Afeni got out, she was like, okay, well, you're still going to continue, like you are the next generation who's going to continue this work.
Right.
And so, anybody having children, anybody in the BLA, anybody in the Black Panther Party who were having children, they were all part of a family. Like everybody was looking after each other. That's why Afeni and Assata felt confident enough to have children is they knew that they would be provided for and taken care of by folks in the community. They knew it's not just going to be me. If I get locked up the rest of my life, my baby will be provided for by folks in the movement, folks in the community. So that's that's a brave, radical thing to do. To be like, so regardless of the circumstances, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, sir.
Their motivation for doing it, I feel like is very brave because you don't know what's going to happen. So to even say, I'm going to have this child's going to carry on the work.
Yeah.
That itself is a radical, thing to do.
Okay. Yes, sir. So let's fast forward a bit, right? So like we've lived through various Democratic administrations, even Barack Obama era, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think she remained at the top of the America's Most Wanted list up until her passing? And in your view, why was the state so unwilling to release their grip on Assata Shakur? Why do you think that is?
The U.S. I don't know. The U.S. government's got a long memory and harbors a long grudge against folks who defy it. It's Assata embarrassed the U.S. government. Assata embarrassed the U.S. government badly by escaping from prison and then escaping the country and then getting asylum from Fidel Castro in Cuba and still continuing to write. She was just embarrassing the U.S. government, continually. So I think they just didn't like that. I think a lot of folks probably did not really. A lot of politicians probably just didn't really care that much. They probably like, you know what? Like, if she were here, she probably, maybe she would have been pardoned years ago. But the fact that she got away in a way that embarrassed everybody, embarrassed the prison, embarrassed the police who couldn't find her. I think that all these different administrations up through Obama, even just did not have the bravery to say, you know what, she's good. Like, we're good. Like, what are we worried about Assata anymore? Like, I think it's just, they just didn't like that. They felt like everybody else, so many other folks in the Black liberation movement were caught, were killed, incarcerated, and she got away. I think they just don't like to let anybody get away. They don't like to let any of us, escape, thumb their nose at the U.S. government. So I think it was just out of vindictiveness, out of spite, embarrassment that they continued to have this, $2 million reward for her. It was just sort of, she was the one that got away. But they couldn't let that go.
So whenever we read and study about the things that she was fighting for, what she represented, and then we see what's going on in society right now, current political times, and it seems so much like the same things are happening. In your opinion, how do you imagine she would look at what's going on right now, these times?
Yeah, I mean, one of the tragedies is that we, since this $2 million bounty was put on her head, and she really had to go in exile. She had to go in double exile, because she was in Cuba in exile. But even in Cuba, she couldn't really be free to this is after 2000 when the bounty went up, and any crazy person could go and try to be a hero, try to get rich. So she was, I can't imagine how lonely, how isolated she was, these last couple of decades of her life. The tragedy is that, I mean, how great would that have been to be able to have her continue to give interviews like this, like talking to you, or like, writing, publishing, and to really hear what she had to, would have to say. Because right now we can speculate, we can be like, oh, she would think this, she'd be horrified. Of course she'd be horrified. That's not even a question. But in her own words, and her words are so, beautiful and poetic, and it sort of gives us hope, gives us right now I feel like we don't have folks who are really taking up that sort of leadership and sort of giving words to our frustration, who are sort of taking charge and being like, this is what we need to do, and also we need to come together as as a community and do all these things. I think somebody who's like an orator, a speaker, and a writer with Assata's talent and influence, and she really could have done so much right now just to give us hope and to give us something. But she couldn't even do that, and so I don't know. I know that she'd be horrified, but I think she'd be more horrified. Back up. I think she'd be horrified about what's happening in the country, in the world, especially. I mean, obviously, because there's no doubt about that. I also think that she would be disappointed that we're not doing more about it. That we're not actually. I mean, not to say we're not out there in the streets of the BLA, but like the Black Panther Party. At the Black Panther Party at its best, when they're seeing a need and filling that need, feeding hungry school children, helping folks with healthcare, helping people have with their rent strikes, so they need to rent strike, just community, everyday things, community things. We sometimes I feel like in current crises like we have today, we get so overwhelmed, which is the point, right? It's the point of this administration is to overwhelm us with one thing after the other, so that we don't even know which way to look. You know what I'm saying? Like, but we got to stay focused. And I think, there's a question in the chat: what skills are associated with Assata's history that can help us solve current problems today? And like I'm just saying, like, she was about educating herself and educating other folks, not just reacting, but educating, uniting, coming together, forming community, and addressing needs, right here and now. Like, not just Assata, but I'm talking about Mutulu Shakur, who taught himself acupuncture so that he could help folks in his community, detox from heroin. Talking about Afeni Shakur, who was tenants' rights or advocate. All these folks are just about like, yeah, we want revolution, we want liberation, but we're not going to get revolution and liberation if we don't take care of our folks, take care of our children, take care of our old folks. Like, we're not going to get anybody on our side. And actually, maybe that's the lesson, that Assata learned was, when she said in one of her letters, she said, all these folks are saying things about me. I need to speak directly to my people. And that's what, people hear that, like, oh, who is this? Otherwise, she's not going to reach anybody. If she's just out, when the BLA is out there, doing their actions, if they don't have the support of the people, if they're not communicating with them, if not connecting with people, then they're never going to win, because they're never going to get, the community support. You're not going to win without the community support. You're not going to get community support if you don't talk to them, if you don't reach out to them, go knock on their door and introduce yourself. So it's, and I said this before, but yeah, it's all about community work. And I think, Assata ultimately, I think she'd want us to do more of these things where we're talking about, what can we do, and actually then having a plan, saying like, okay, I met you, you're down there in Louisiana, I'm up here in California. We got other folks, tuning in from wherever else, but we got this network of folks. So rather than just like, talk about who our ancestors, what they would do, what they were doing, like, all right, well then what they would want us to do is keep working, keep working.
Along with the myth busting kind of conversation I love to have, talk about, even beyond Assata Shakur, the amount of people that we have that were political prisoners and in exile and things like that. Talk about what life in exile actually is. Like, we don't want to glorify and make things prettier than what it sounds like. Oh, they're in exile, like it's cool. Like,
Right.
It's not a vacation. It's not like it's, you pretty much cut off from a lot of resources, from a lot of your family and your nucleus, your network. So talk about the life of exile for some of the viewers.
Yeah, man, I'm glad you brought that up. And that's really a great observation and a great point to make, because I mean, a lot of folks were impacted by this movement, by the choices that they made. I mean, it was a sacrifice. It wasn't like, you know, oh, I'll donate my time or my money, you know, on Sundays to this organization. It's a life sacrifice that these folks made. And exile, I mean, there's a lot of folks who, there's only three options. There's exile, incarceration, or death. You know, nobody got into the movement thinking like, I'm gonna do this for a little while, then I'm gonna go get a job, you know? So exile, I mean, when you're in exile, even when you're underground, I mean, Assata was one of the rare folks who actually made it, you know, who weren't in exile. But a lot of folks were underground, which is also just like, you can't go outside, you have to take a new name, you're cut off from everybody, cut off from your family. I mean, that's not, like you say, that's not a vacation. That is lonely. You're always, you know, afraid, you know, all this stuff. And a lot of folks lived in underground, not by choice, but because they had no other option. It wasn't like, I'm gonna, you know, go underground. They had no other option. And when the folks who were incarcerated left behind family, you know, they didn't know when they were getting out, if they ever got out. Like, they all had children. And I'm thinking a lot about this, about the children who were, you know, left behind, young children who, you know, they don't really know what's going on. They know that their mom or their dad is on the run from the law, then they got arrested, and now they'll never see him again. And, you know, I think about Assata in Cuba and, you know, her daughter, and I think that separation from your daughter, Matulu, Afeni, all these folks who were, you know, Sekou Odinga did over 30 years and he had children. And I want to know, just, you know, I mean, a lot of these children, I'm just like, man, like it's hard for everybody. I just can't imagine that sort of level of, you know, you want to be proud of them, what they did, but you also want to be like, but also I want my parent, you know, like, ultimately, you know, respect. And I talked to some children, you know, some of these kids who, you know, they never said, oh, I wish, you know, you hadn't done that. It was more just like, well, I wish she was there though. You know, I wish she were there growing up. So, like, you know, like I'm saying, like, it's a sacrifice you make, and
it is.
Do this kind of work, you know. I mean, you can do volunteer work, you can do this and that, but to go underground, to be in exile, that is you've given your life, right, to the movement, to the struggle, and that is literal. You know, you're giving your life. You say, this is what my life is about from here on out. So, I imagine how the loneliness of that, the isolation.
I talk to my friends all the time in private about, you know, we live at a time right now, thankfully, where a lot of those children are older now and they're writing their own books. Like the move bombing in Giant Africa, you know, the book came out last year about the move bombing, right? That M.K. Asante writing about his father, and Ta-Nehisi Coates and Paul Coates, his father, right? And they're hearing about their childhood, what it was like having a parent like that, and what the day-to-day was like being in that. Like, it's not sweet, it's not cool, it's not like some glorified thing once again. Like you're saying, you're sacrificing everything. You know, for real, you know.
And you know, they're putting their children through that too. It's not just a personal decision. You know, they are also setting their children up to be, you know, even Tupac, you know, when he was growing up, he talked about how federal agents, when his stepfather Mutulu Shakur was still underground on the run from 1980 on to 1986, 87, Tupac talks about, and his sister Setcha would talk about how, you know, federal agents would show up at their schools, their homes, looking for Mutulu, their stepfather. So that kind of trauma of just being like, it's not just you made the decision, you pay the consequences. It's also, okay, well, if you got children, your children are going to also have to come up and survive this and have trauma from, you know.
They're losing jobs. You can't keep a stable household. You can't. You're always bouncing around. You're on the run. It's a lot of things that you wouldn't want for a stable household.
Yeah, but I mean, I mean, respect to folks these children who have kept the name and kept their, parents' name alive. I mean, like, like Mike Africa Jr., Fred Hampton Jr., these folks who are, talking about their parents, even though they have every right to be like, I just want to be left alone. I just want to be a family person and raise my kids and go to work. They have every right to do that. But a lot of these folks have decided to at least, carry on that legacy and at least keep this work, this history alive.
Yes, sir.
Which is in itself dangerous. It's that's bringing attention to themselves by carrying on the legacy, by keeping that name, is drawing attention to themselves, authority to themselves.
Yes. My last two questions, right? Question from the chat, right quick. Drea, the Sunflower Poet, one of my great poet friends, she said, "Did you learn anything about Assata while you were writing the book that you didn't know before? And if so, how did you learn this thing?"
Yeah, like I mean, I had known, like most folks, I knew about her through her autobiography. That's kind of what most folks know her from. That's where I knew her from. And when I started working on the book, and I started talking to other folks who knew her and who worked with her, and also like just going over old newspaper articles and court transcripts and other archives like that, and learning more about who she was and what she survived, what she accomplished, what she did, or at least things that she was accused of doing. She became more of a person, which she obviously always has been, but we think we get it twisted sometimes, thinking that she's this like superhuman, superwoman, who did all these incredible feats on her own without a community of support behind her. And that's what I learned about all the folks who were behind her, lifting her up, teaching her, guiding her, supporting her. That sort of made her into a more rounded person, more of a human being. In the book, I really wanted to show that these folks are human beings. They have faults, they have insecurities, they have regrets. A lot of times we have a hard time if we're telling our own story, we don't always want to get into it. So sometimes you need some other folks to be like, to tell like it really was. But to me, that just makes it more impressive, who she became, seeing who she was, because she wasn't born, like, Black Power fist and like quoting Marcus Garvey. No, she was educated, she learned from the folks who came before her. So that's what I'm trying to do, is sort of just like make these folks less about, superhuman people who are doing things that we can't do, into these people who are, oh, this is just like me. Like I could do this because I go through the same things. And when I learned about her escape from prison in New Jersey, from Clinton Correctional Facility in New Jersey, I was like, man, like y'all did that. I mean, like that's not, she didn't just fly out of there, sprout wings and fly out the roof. There was a network of people that were all committed to getting her out and supporting her after she was out, not just getting her out and saying good luck, but actually like, okay, now you're out. Now we got to make sure that you don't go back in. And that took money, that took planning, plotting, just organizing. And so learning that for myself, learning that was just like, oh man, like that makes these folks human. I mean, still inspirational, still very inspirational, but also just, very, very human and very real and very much like people that we know. You read about this history, you're like, oh, I know this guy, I know this cat. This guy would do the same thing for me. So that's what I learned from it.
Yes, sir. So in closing, I'm going to give you space to talk about your brand new project, talk about storytelling, and letting folks be human, right? The next story you have about Melvin Van Peebles, man, coming out this January, coming up, forthcoming, right?
Well,
Tell us all about, yeah.
No, January 2027. So a little more than a year. I got a book coming out, same publisher, Mariner Books, about the filmmaker Melvin Van Peebles, who really, I mean, almost single-handed, he's considered, the godfather of Black independent cinema. With his 1971 film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, it was the first time a Black male protagonist had fought against the system, fought against the police, and then got away in the end. And he did it all himself. It was all independent film, and it sort of changed Black cinema. It changed independent. No longer were there just like these figures like Sidney Poitier, or like these very subservient, or like very stately and very professional. Here are some real Black folks in movies, and it really changed how representation came to be about in the arts, and in movies and books and music. Melvin Van Peebles created this movement that was about, we need to take control of our own output. Sort of like with Assata, you take control of your own narrative. If things are going to change, you can't wait on Hollywood to give us good representations of Black folks and the Black struggle. Can't wait on the press to accurately report our stories. So you got to just do it yourself. And so, yeah, Melvin Van Peebles. My book is called Beg, Borrow, Steal. It's about Melvin and about all the ways that independent cinema can be used as a means for liberation. Not just cinema, but also music and also literature. If you take control of the process yourself and you stay, steadfast and stubborn, you say, I'm not going to let anybody dictate to me, how I'm going to tell my own story. So that's what he did, and that's sort of the movement that he kicked off. And that's my book explores, Melvin's life, his work, his art, but also, the pioneering Black independent filmmakers, musicians who came after him to throw like 70s on. So yeah, but that'll be January 2027.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. As always, man, I always tell my guests, you got something new coming out, let me know or hit me up again, man. I'll bring you back and we talk about it, man. I love having.
Yeah, I'd love to come back.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So thanks very much for your time. Thanks for the chat. Thanks to anybody watching this later on in YouTube land. Thank y'all for your time and patience. I want to say rest in power, our sister Assata Shakur. Thank y'all very much. Have a good night. Peace.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Yes, sir.